South Korea celebrates 10 years of officially giving back to the world. From the ashes of war to a global tech titan, South Korea has taken a miraculous leap from where it was 7 decades ago to where it stands now as the world's 10th largest economy. And the transformation couldn't have come without the support of the global community. In 2009, the country became the first in the world to transition from a recipient of international aid to an official donor and active partner of development assistance. From 2010, it's been increasing its contribution as a member of the OECD's Development Assistance Committee, or DAC, becoming the 15th largest contributor in terms of volume as of last year. Today, we discuss this milestone and how South Korea is increasing its role in helping partners in the global community. And for this, there really is no better person to turn to than Ambassador Oh Jun, whose speech 10 years ago marked South Korea's historic transition. He has served as ambassador and permanent representative of the Republic of Korea to the United Nations and as the UN's 71st president of the Economic and Social Council. It's an honor to have you back, Ambassador. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good to be here, Suyong. Thank you.
Well, let's go straight into the questions now. When South Korea became an official donor country on November 25th in 2009 in Paris, and you were actually there making this transition as South Korea's Deputy Minister for Multilateral and Global Affairs for the Foreign Ministry. And you were telling the DAC committee in Paris that South Korea is ready and very committed to give back to the world. How significant was this transition? I mean, especially for a country that used to be one of the poorest in the world.
Yes, I still remember that. It was truly a significant milestone in Korea's development process, I should say. At that special meeting to accept Korea to the OECD Development Assistance Committee, I remember that I said, when the OECD was created in 1961, South Korea was still struggling to rebuild itself from the ashes of the Korean War, and our per capita GDP was only about $82 US. Since then, Korea, of course, had received a total of 13 billion US dollars in foreign aid until we graduated as a recipient and became a donor in the 1990s. Our accession to the DAC was in 2010 was very important because it made our donorship official.
But then South Korea's development assistance, it didn't begin exactly in 2010 though. How did South Korea start preparing to officially give back years before that?
Well, if you think about it, Korea International Cooperation Agency, or KOICA, was established in 1991, and it started its work to assist developing countries. And Korea joined the OECD in 1996. But one can say that Korea became a net donor because for a while Korea was both a donor and recipient. So Korea became a net donor from the 2000s as we came off the list of recipient countries in 1995 for the World Bank and in 2000 for OECD DAC.
And to quote you directly, when we became a net donor, that day in Paris, you said, before taking any pride in our transformation, we're very humbled by the realization of how much South Korea owes to the world, and that this country, it believes that our responsibility to pay back to the world by sharing what we have gone through. What strength has South Korea shown in ODA, and how has its development experience really set the country apart in the way that it delivers development assistance to other countries?
Well, I think we have some unique advantages as a recipient turned donor country. For example, we know from our own experience all the challenges and difficulties faced by a developing country. And that's probably why Korea has attached importance to education, rural development, and infrastructure building as key areas in our development assistance.
And while South Korea, it's been increasing its ODA every year. It recorded the highest ODA increase from 2010 to 2019 at 11.9%. And South Korea's ratio of contribution against its gross national income, it was 0.15%, which is really below the target that countries have. And actually, only 5 out of the 29 countries met the 0.7% goal. What really is the significance of the 0.7 figure, and why is it quite difficult for countries to meet this goal?
Well, the 0.7% aid target is a target for donor countries to contribute 0.7% of their gross national income as ODA. The target is hard to achieve, not least because advanced economies have a variety of areas competing for their budget allocation. If you think about it, countries like Korea, for example, are burdened by a huge defense budget, while for some Scandinavian countries, their ODA budget is sometimes larger than their defense budget, thanks to their stable security environment.
Last month, the UK government said it would cut ODA from 0.7% to 0.5% of its GNI this year due to what it called the economic emergency. And of course, that led to the resignation of a Foreign Office Minister in protest of that move. And the decision still faces a lot of criticism from members of the media and experts. And of course, the counter-argument there is that that charity really starts at home and that a lot of this foreign aid was being misdirected. But then what could be the consequence of reducing aid during this pandemic, especially in impoverished and politically unstable nations?
Well, the pandemic crisis has a huge negative impact on the international community's efforts to achieve sustainable development through implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, by 2030. The UN's SDGs report that they issue every year, the report that came out this year says that for the first time in 20 years, the global population in extreme poverty will grow again, almost by 100 million people. If some countries, such as the United Kingdom, are cutting down on their ODA budget due to what they call a domestic fiscal emergency, which would probably make matters worse. Even though all the countries in the world are now focused on how we can overcome this pandemic crisis as soon as possible, it is also time, I think, for us to consider long-term implications of our actions as well, because the future of humanity depends on all of us.
Well, you've been among the opinion leaders and diplomats who have called for multilateralism and global coordination at this time, but there has been a rise of nationalism amid this pandemic, and most recently when it came to a vaccine. We're seeing G7 countries procure millions and millions of doses of mRNA vaccines, and they have enough to inoculate everyone in their countries nearly 3 times over. But then developing countries, they can only vaccinate 1 in 10 years, according to the People's Vaccine Alliance. But then why should rich countries really care about equal access, and what kind of support do developing countries need?
Well, we cannot blame the government that are trying to give as many vaccines as possible to their own people for their people's safety. But in the middle of this global pandemic crisis, which actually requires global solidarity, unfortunately, we have not seen much of unity and cooperation among nations so far. The untimely trend of rising nationalism seems also conspicuous in their efforts to secure vaccines for their people, which can be called vaccine nationalism. But if we look at the bright side, there is what is called the COVAX facility, which is joined by both higher income and lower income economies to ensure to ensure COVID-19 vaccines reach those in greatest need. Currently, 156 economies, including South Korea, have joined it. WHO Director General Dr. Ghebreyesus said, working together through the COVAX facility is not charity. It's in every country's own best interest to control the pandemic and accelerate the global economy recovery.
And health issues are just a part of the picture, really. Emerging from this pandemic, it's quite clear that the world has many challenges on its hands as it tries to move towards a sustainable world. What kind of leadership or partnership do you hope to see from the incoming Biden administration in the United States? And do you see a greater role for countries like South Korea to really work with the Americans in restoring multilateral values and order?
Well, I share the expectation with a lot of people that the incoming Biden administration would be able to restore the United States leadership in the world, especially by promoting multilateralism. President Trump's America First policy has not only weakened global solidarity and cooperation, but also undermine the interests of the United States itself. Because in this globalized world, what is good for the whole world is also good for the United States and vice versa. So it is all the more important for the middle powers, such as Korea, as you mentioned. It is important for us to have a more stable and rule-based world by strengthening global governance provided by multilateral institutions like the United Nations, rather than by a handful of great powers.
And well, it's quite clear from that, it's quite clear to see that this recovery from the pandemic is going to be quite unequal. We keep hearing about a digital transformation, and over the course of the pandemic, of course, we saw these IT giants get bigger and bigger. And when it comes to work as well, some people are faring better than ever with their telecommuting and their, widely spread stock portfolios. But some people aren't going to see their jobs come back, even when their economies reopen. What kinds of key issues or discussions do you hope to see from the international community as it prioritizes its agendas in 2021?
Well, obviously, the pandemic's impact is more acute and longer lasting on the vulnerable groups in our society, such as women, children, persons with disabilities, and migrant workers, for example. Therefore, addressing inequalities is already becoming a key issue to address in the post-pandemic world. As soon as we get out of the woods, I think a top priority for the international community should be to go back to tackling global problems that have been neglected or exacerbated under the pandemic, such as climate change, poverty, inequality, racism, and armed conflict.
And Ambassador, in this post-pandemic, very highly digitalized era, how do you think South Korea can increase its role and increase its aid effectiveness to really help countries that are falling behind build sustainable cities and communities that people actually want to live in and keep on developing?
Well, Korea needs to enhance its aid effectiveness so as to contribute to achieving the SDGs and realizing the vision that we can overcome the problems we have brought about in the process of developing ourselves. Fortunately, Korea is in a position to take advantage of new waves of technological innovations, including those of artificial intelligence, robotics, and synthetic biology, which are often called the fourth industrial revolution technologies. For that, I think we need a kind of paradigm shift, a new way of seeing what is happening to us, both for ourselves and for the countries we help build a sustainable future.
Right, so as you mentioned, Korea was really sharing its knowledge in rural development and education in the past, but now as it advances, it can really leverage its strengths as a digital leader in the global community. Well, I'm afraid this is where we'll have to wrap up the conversation today, but that was Professor Oh Jun of Kyung University, who served as Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Republic of Korea to the United Nations from 2013 to 2016. Thank you again so much, sir, for your time, and we hope you have a happy new year.
Thank you very much. Happy New Year.
And to our viewers, thank you very much for watching.